When you think of Cairo, you probably think of the pyramids of Giza. Yet the city itself, despite getting its fair share of tourists, may be among the most overlooked megacities in the world, partly because of its chaotic nature. The traffic is constant. And the blowing of horns is relentless. It's been called the city of 1,000 minarets for its preponderance of Arab architecture, and it remains headquarters for the politically influential Arab League of Middle Eastern nations. This city exerts enormous influence with the oldest and largest film and music industry in the Arab world. Cairo itself has a population of more than 10 million people, but Greater Cairo is approaching 22 million, making it among the world's largest urban districts. It's impossible to get a full understanding of Egypt without being exposed to what is by far the country's most important city. As for dealing with the traffic, there's always the metro, which has been around since the late 80s and was the first subway system in Africa. But if you want to stay above ground and get around with the least hassle, your best solution here, and I say this with no promotional consideration in mind, is Uber. It's ubiquitous, convenient, and super cheap. I'm in the heart of downtown in Tahrir Square, probably best known internationally as a place of mass demonstrations. During the so-called Arab Spring of 2011, more than 2 million pro-democracy demonstrators gathered here and in the surrounding streets. And it has become a symbol of demonstrations in the Middle East. That's the Cairo Museum behind me. One of the reasons that for years people have enjoyed coming to Cairo, the vast repository of ancient Egypt's treasures. It has been eclipsed by the Grand Egyptian Museum on the outskirts of Cairo, which recently opened in 2023 and which has now taken some of the glow from one of the world's oldest museums behind me, but it's still open and attracting visitors. This square, as famous as it is and as central as it has been to modern Cairo history, is a disappointment. If you come here expecting to see something traditional or pretty, it is not pretty. Urban planners have made a mess of it as a public space. The government, in all likelihood, does not want it as a true public space. There are a few places to sit here. There's no park-like grounds. There are no children playing. There are ugly air ducts sticking up all over the place. What trees there are just stubby little olive trees in giant pots. This plaza is a kind of unofficial no-go zone. There are Egyptian police permanently stationed around the edges of the square to make sure that nothing goes on here that may be critical of the government. Just up ahead, along a principal avenue along the Nile, are some of the city's more expensive hotels, as well as several embassies, including those of the United States and the UK, which are practically side by side. Just a short walk from here is the Corniche, where one can walk along the Nile. Everything in downtown sort of spins off or spins into this square. In the center of the square, which is near where I'm walking now, is the wonderful 3,000-year-old obelisk from the era of Ramses II, which is totally entrapped in a traffic circle with nowhere really from which you can admire it or appreciate it properly. I'm in Khan el-Khalili, one of the Arab world's most famous bazaars that has been a fixture in Cairo for 8 centuries. And even if you're not into shopping, you'll want to check this place out simply for a taste of old Cairo. This place draws its name from an early caravanserai. It's located here. Caravanserais were old world travelers' inns that popped up along well-established trade routes in the Middle East, South and Central Asia, and China. There were 3 such places in Khan el-Khalili, and this bazaar was named after the most famous one. This is a cavernous bazaar. One could not so easily get lost in it because it's on a grid, and so you could just cross and crisscross and stay here until your heart's content and you find your way out. But nonetheless, it's very huge, and people selling just about anything you can imagine.
What you looking for you?
Oh, I'm not looking for anything.
Yeah, I have anything, one color, anything.
Anything in one color?
Yeah.
Do you have a hippopotamus?
I have. I have the shop for me side, original antique.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure you have it all.
Yeah, you like the antique here?
No, I love antiques, but I can't put an antique in a backpack.
Yeah, I have antique in here for no antique. I have here antique different.
Yeah.
He's here for 80 years, 50 years, 40 years.
How long have you been selling in this market?
He's here for me 55 years.
55 years. So that means you came here in about early 1970s.
Yeah, he's here for me about 63. He's here for me in 55 for a small boy.
Really?
Yeah.
And what about your father? Was he here also?
No, father here. This is gold. Gold and silver.
I was asking him how long has his family been here in this souk?
120 years.
120 years.
3 generations. His grandfather and his father and him. It's 19,
and your family as well?
1960.
What? Your family came here in 1960. Is that generally true of merchants in the souk, that families just, they stay? There's a lot of continuity. That's why everybody knows everybody else, I guess.
Exactly. We are since 1924.
1924.
3 generations.
Yeah. Amazing.
For us, it was the Turkish. They owned that market, and after them, when they left, we owned that shops and this area, all of it, the Egyptian.
You see, he's talking about the history of his family's workplace in terms of the transition from the Ottoman Empire to when the Egyptians took over again. I mean, how many places in the world can you say that? You know, my family was here for 120 years.
Yeah.
My son is going to take my place after.
I see.
And you're the last of the line.
Yes.
Yeah.
أنت آخر واحد في العرق عشان
It's
بنتك
for
ما
me,
بتشتغلش
all
شغلانة
for me.
الفضة.
Yeah. All for me.
Yeah.
He's the last one.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
بقول لك مبروك.
Thank you.
And may peace be upon you.
بقول لك يا سلام عليك.
He's
بقول له
here for,
peace be
good
upon you
for
too.
me and good for you.
Salam alaikum.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Of all the places in this bazaar, there's only one el-Fashawi, which during 2 centuries as the world's oldest coffee house has been a hangout for philosophers, sheikhs, and famous writers.
You really don't come here to eat. There's just coffee, espresso, teas, that sort of thing, the way it was 2.5 centuries ago, apparently. There are little nooks and crannies in this coffee shop, but most people prefer to congregate out in the alleyway where there are tables on both sides, and where I suspect originally this all began. I might add, the music seldom seems to stop. I'm at the Cairo Citadel, or as it's often called, the Citadel of Saladin, for the 12th century Kurdish sultan, who began its construction in 1171 after conquering Egypt. You could almost be anywhere in Cairo and see this place, perched on a hill in the middle of the city. It's more than merely a fortress. For more than 700 years, up until the late 1800s, it was the seat of government and where Egypt's rulers lived. So much of Egypt's history during those 7 centuries is wrapped up in this place. From Saladin's sultanate, followed by the Mamluks, the Ottomans, the French, and maybe the most colorful of all, the reign of the Albanian Pasha Muhammad Ali and his successors well into the 19th century. Today, this sprawling citadel is not only a medieval relic, but is a series of museums. It has gone through several modifications with not a lot left as it was from the days of Saladin 1,000 years ago. Many of those changes occurred during the rule of the aforementioned Pasha Muhammad Ali, who, of all the individuals who've ruled Egypt from ancient times up until the present, has to be among the most colorful. Ali was a peculiar choice of ruler who, although not being Ottoman, was appointed by the Ottomans to restore order to Egypt in 1805 after the French briefly controlled the country. But he quickly consolidated power to himself outside the channels of his ostensible overlords. The great leader had in mind to dedicate this mosque to his second son, who died in 1816. But Muhammad Ali lived to rule over Egypt from 1805 until his death in 1849. After he was buried here, this mosque, rather ironically, served to aggrandize his memory, not that of his son. The floors inside here are marble. They are not carpeted as in many mosques elsewhere. And for that reason, the sound is very echoey. And as you can probably see, there are quite a few people inside this great prayer hall. Muhammad Ali, when he commissioned this mosque in the 1840s, followed the style of his former Turkish Ottoman superiors. From a stylistic point of view, this mosque would fit in just as well in Istanbul as it does in Cairo. And here is the tomb of Muhammad Ali. The courtyard of this grand mosque is almost as impressive as the interior. Just a beautiful colonnaded space with gorgeous finishes on each of these arched colonnades. gonna try to find out what this is. Hi there. What is this?
Kunafa?
Oh, it's
Kunafa cheese.
kunafa cheese.
Oh yes.
It's-
Soft and hard.
Yeah, I'm gonna try it, but I'm gonna go eat first,
What?
and I'll come back.
Welcome.
Okay. Kunafa cheese. Something I don't really need, but after I have a little dinner, I may just stop back by there and sample it. One thing you have to remember about Cairo is that it's a desert city, owing its existence to the Nile, which runs through the middle of it. And its architecture reflects that, with the same dominant sandstone hue that makes the buildings blend into the native environment. Nighttime is another thing. That's when the desert disappears, in a sense. Under the lights, when Cairo comes alive, and there's an extra spring in people's step as they enjoy the cool breeze, free from having to squint into the sun. I'm in a lively neighborhood in downtown near my hotel, just a few blocks east of Tahrir Square. In addition to the normal sounds that you hear in a city, here you hear a lot of people talking, even among strangers. People sort of unbuttoned. They may even at times appear to be arguing among themselves, but they're just expressing themselves. Nobody seems to be on the sidelines, and I like that. For some of you, possibly, I don't know, it might seem to go against the grain of what you would expect of Egypt, especially if you've never been here. That I, as an American, during a time of unrest in the Middle East, am walking the streets of Cairo without the slightest of apprehension or hesitation. Well, all I can say is, even though we live in a troubled world, and there's no denying conflicts and problems, it's very easy for misinformation and disinformation to lead to misconceptions. Take it from a guy wandering the streets of Cairo at night, happy to be here. Okay.
مليون على اليوتيوب.
Yeah. Okay, that's everybody, right?